членом Совета по городскому развитию и автором и участником множества культурных, архитектурных, дизайнерских проектов. И мы сейчас послушаем, как, собственно, видят городское развитие Манчестера.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to your beautiful city. I'm going to talk about a particular project in Manchester called Nью-Айлигтон, which is right in the city centre. But just to give that some context, just a short piece about me and my background and how I became involved in Manchester. So this is me. And I run a practice of civil and structural and transport engineers. We're based in London and Manchester, and we're very imaginatively called Stockley. And I also act for a number of central government bodies, which is what all this stuff is down here. So it just means I've been around quite a long time, really, that's all that means. So I started to, I'm a Londoner, I come from Stratford in East London, which 5 years ago probably nobody had ever heard of, but now it's going to be the scene of the 2012 Olympics. It's become a place, a very poor part of London that's being regenerated through the Olympics. And it's really great to go back to your old hometown and see something very good happening. Maybe I'll come back and tell the Stratford story one day, if you invite me. But let's start in Manchester. I went to Manchester in the early 1990s and started to become involved in some work in the city centre. And it links very well with what was being said earlier. Manchester did a very clever thing when it started to think about regenerating itself. Manchester considers itself the first industrial city, the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And of course it was, in a sense, the first industrial city to die back as well. But in the early 1990s, it took the idea that it had to get hold of itself and start to rebuild itself as a city. Now, many cities were doing the same thing in the UK and probably around the world. But one of the things that Manchester got right was these other cities were going around trying to get other people to invest in their place, and they were going to businesses around the country and to other countries saying, why don't you come and invest in our city? And people were, well, why should we come here, you know? Manchester didn't do that, first of all. What it did was it started to build cultural buildings and sports buildings and invest in the culture of its place. And at the time, everybody else in the UK wondered what they were up to. In fact, it was worse than that. Everybody else in the UK thought, Manchester have got this wrong, you know, they should be getting commercial office investors, they should be getting big business investors to come to their city. Why are they building an arena with an ice rink in it and 19,000 seats? Why are they building a new concert hall? Why have they built a cycling velodrome with a track in? Why have they built a new stadium for athletics? But of course everything came clear about 5 or 6 years into this project when they had many of these things in place. Because then when Manchester went out to the world and to the UK market and said, you're a big firm of accountants, why haven't you got an office in Manchester? And they said, well, why should we come to Manchester? And they said, well, we have one of the best concert halls in the world, we have one of the best cycling velodromes in the world, with the best track cycling team in the world, we have this big arena where we hold the best rock concerts. And suddenly these people said, hey, yeah, our staff would like to do this. And they're kind of bored with living in London, it's too big for them. So they did this very clever thing. And within another 5 years, many, many big companies had moved to Manchester to the extent that Manchester had gone from not being able to get people to come into big office schemes and build them. And it got to the point where they were having to build new offices to accommodate the people who were coming. So I think it's really interesting, that link through, by investing in the culture of your place, whatever that culture is actually, and I agree with them completely, whether it's to do with food or sports or music or the whole culture of your place, you make it a better place for you to be, it makes it a better place for the people who live and work there. And in doing so, you make it a much more interesting place for people to visit and for other people to come and live in your place. We all love to live in, visit places that we go to, and we find that the residents and the other people that work there really love their city. It's quite difficult to love a place where the local people don't love it, actually. It's a very kind of infectious thing, human emotion. So it was a smart thing. So I'd been working there since about 1993. In 1996, suddenly the bomb went off in the centre of Manchester. I was very lucky that nobody was killed by the bomb. It did a lot of damage right at the core of the city, and particularly in the retail, the shopping area of the city. And a competition was run to redesign the city centre. And I got together with an architect friend, and we pulled the team together, and we entered that competition and won it. And it's just one of those very lucky things that happens to you in life. I talked to Gace about, it's like catching a wave if you're surfing. It might never happen to you in your life, but if it does, you need to get on that wave and ride it really, really hard. So we went for, and at the time my practice was tiny, just a few of us, but it meant that we very quickly got involved in these major schemes and started to gain a lot of experience very rapidly. So I'm just going to show you a few slides of some of the projects that we've involved in so you can understand the kind of things we do, and then I'll come into the Nью-Айлингтон project, because that's a project about finding good ways to collaborate with local people on their developing their area, repairing and remaking their area. So I started with this because this is a building called Urbis. Before the bomb went off, this was a car park, just a level piece of ground. Just to the right of the picture is the cathedral. So Manchester Cathedral used to overlook a car park. There wasn't even a tarmac car park, it was just a kind of piece of not very nice ground with a car park on it. Next to the cathedral is one of the great music schools of the world, Cheetham School of Music, which is joined up to the Royal Northern College of Music in the UK. So we have the cathedral, a great music school, and then just to the north of that, Victoria Station, the second of the two main stations in Manchester. And at the heart of it was a car park. So although this wasn't damaged by the bomb, in the master plan that we developed after the bomb, we drew a line around this car park, and we just said this has to be some beautiful gardens for the cathedral and the school, and we just drew a shape and said cultural building. We didn't know what it was, we just thought. To the south there was the big shopping centre, the great shopping malls and all of that, and just to the other side there was a big cinema complex, the kind of pop culture, the very fizzy pop culture of the world, and then we had the cathedral and the more cerebral stuff of the school, and we thought something needs to bridge those. And that was the plan. The city then decided to run a competition for this. So again, myself and the architect friend, the same one, got together and made a pitch for the competition, an anonymous competition, and we won. My practice was only 2 years old. Again, an amazing stroke of luck to have in your life. So, and this is the building we made, and it's a museum actually. It's called Urbis, which means of the city. And it's the museum of the modern cities. We found that there were no museums actually in the world that were just focused on cities. Even though we now live in a world where most of us live in cities, none of our museums really focus and study on cities alone. So this was the idea of Urbis. And we won the competition because we said, well, if it's about cities, it should be a building that you can see into from the city, and you can stand in and see the city from. That was odd for a museum, because most museums are just big walls and spaces that you can't see into and you can't see out of. You go to look at things. So that was Urbis, and it now sits in this beautiful park. This is taken with my back to the cathedral and the Cheetham School in the shopping area just to the south. When we in the original competition, winning entry, you could walk up the roof of the building. The city council was one step too far for the city council, and it just frightened the life out of them when we said, well, people will just walk up and it will be beautiful to look at the city, and they said, no, we can't do that. So maybe one day we'll do that. And then, just along from there, one of the major sites that was destroyed, we built this. There were very few apartments and very few people living in the centre of Manchester. In 1990, there were 250 people only living in the city centre itself. That's now 20,000 or so, or more. So a key part of the master plan was to build somewhere to start to regenerate this living in the city centre, and this was one of the schemes that did that. I'll skip past. One of the first sites we became involved in Manchester was, this is very near to Nью-Айлигтон, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And this is on the old canal basins where they enter Manchester, because most of the industrial materials and the finished products were brought in and out of Manchester on canal systems. And Piccadilly Basin, which is where this is, was where two of the main canals joined up. And so it was full of these derelict warehouse buildings. And one of the first things we did there with our client who owned all of this site was to restore all of the canals, and then slowly, one building at a time, we took that building there, for instance, and here it is now in the background, converted into apartments, has a cafe and a bar on the ground floor. We've repaired all of the canal here, made a new canal basin, new apartments. This is right in the city centre beside the main station. And down at the southern end of that, closest to the city centre, was the oldest of the buildings. And this is the oldest warehouse in Manchester. It was made in 1804. And it's very odd because all the warehouses in Manchester are made of brick, clay brick, red clay brick of that. And this is made from stone. And it's made from stone because it was made by an engineer from Yorkshire. And he shipped the stone down the canal and built his own piece of Yorkshire in Manchester. That makes much more sense if you understand some of the rivalries in England over the different counties. Here's what it looks like now. A couple of years ago we finished repairing and restoring it. And in fact we liked it so much that that's where we have our offices now. And we do buildings like this. This is actually a building for University College in the centre of London, but I show it because it's one of the most technically sophisticated passive energy buildings in the world, actually. We designed it with an architect called Alan Shaw and with Cambridge University. So it's completely passively ventilated, very low energy building. It's the School for Slavonic and East European Studies. And it's a very beautiful building actually now that it's finished. I mean, just to show you the level of complexity, we drew the whole building in 3 dimensions so that we could properly understand how the air moved around the building and test the way that air moved around the building as it changed in temperature at different times of day. And then, again, the regeneration theme. this is a kind of familiar looking building, I guess, actually. It's a 1960s, it's the biggest listed building, historic listed building in Europe, I'm told. It's a huge 4 blocks of apartments that spread over the hill on Sheffield, looking down at the station of Sheffield. Obviously, took the photographs with the poppies to try and make it look a little bit more. But it is a pretty tough building when it was built, and we're in the process of, again, this building had a lot of residents who moved in the 1960s, and they had children, and their children lived there, and their children, so it's become a place which actually is, although architecturally it's not always much loved by people from the outside, actually the people that live there love it. And so we've been restoring it and rebuilding it, and when we're finished it will look something like that, we say. There it is on the way, that's the first block, beginning to be ready to let. And we do odd things like this. One of the developers we work with a lot, and we'll talk about them on the Nью-Айлингтон work, is a developer called Urban Splash. They're very well known in the UK. They're very intelligent developers. They're intelligent because A, they make money, and that's always a good thing to do if you can make good things and make money. Obviously just making money is not very intelligent at all. But they make beautiful things that make money, and they make beautiful places. And but they have to sell their flats, and instead of building a show flat, they asked us one day, could we work with their architects and design a sales office for them? And this is what we made for them. It was supposed to be a temporary building that would just be there until they sold all the apartments, but actually it's been there for 13 years now, and they've changed it into something else since. And then we do odd things like this. In Liverpool, when it was 2007, 2008, the capital of culture, we get very involved with artists, often in helping artists to execute their work. And this beautiful thing is called La Princesse, and it's a 15-ton mechanical spider with, I think there are 5 people driving that. But unlike real spiders, this one wasn't very good at making a web for itself, so we had to get the engineers in to make a web so that it could hang. If you look closely, you can see there are people operating